The grand conclave of the Drevani. Imperium filled its hemispherical chamber with the heavy scent of iron, oxide and ceremony. Thousands of subject species delegates sat beneath banners woven from captured starlight projector threads, their attention fixed on the dais where Emperor Vorlag IX rose on his six-jointed legs. His carapace had been polished to a mirror sheen, and the ritual scars of conquest ran down his thorax in deliberate intersecting lines. A silence pressed into the hall as the ceremonial herald beat a hollow gong. 3 times, Vorlag's vocal slits parted, and his voice carried across every network speaker from the core worlds to the fringe territories. For 3 centuries, the human species has expanded into the periphery, mistaking our tolerance for weakness. They colonize worlds, ignore treaty boundaries, and infect our trade routes with their chaotic commerce. No more. The Drevani Imperium, by the will of the conclave and the blood right of a thousand victories, proclaims a state of total war upon the human stellar accord. Their worlds will answer to our garrisons, their fleets will burn, their defiance will end. A rolling roar of approval surged through the chamber. Claws, tendrils, and jointed limbs clashed in what passed for applause among the assembled species. At the center of the dais, a hollow plate shimmered and resolved into the image of the human diplomatic envoy, receiving the message in real time. Ambassador Lydia Kine stood in a modest station office far from Earth. A trim woman in her late 50s with close-cropped gray hair and a ceremonial sash that seemed almost childish against the grandeur of the conclave. She listened to the declaration without moving, her expression unreadable. Vorlag concluded, "You will relay this to your government and make no attempt at negotiation. There is nothing to discuss." Lydia Kine did not answer right away. She tilted her head and her lips twitched. The delegates nearest the hollow plate leaned in, their sensory appendages quivering. The sound began low in her chest, a short breathy exhalation that caught in her throat, then it grew. A chuckle escaped her, then another, until she was laughing with her whole body, one hand bracing against her console. The laughter rolled through the conclave sound system, a warm, unforced noise that seemed to peel away the gravity of the moment layer by layer. Vorlag's primary eyes dilated. "You find the destruction of your species amusing?" Lydia wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and steadied herself against the desk. She looked into the pickup lens, and a genuine, almost maternal smile crossed her face. "Your Majesty, you really have no idea what you just did." Before Vorlag could formulate a response, the hollow plate flickered off. The human ambassador had terminated the link from her end. The silence that followed was a living thing, thick, uncertain, and carrying the first cold threads of dread. The gong master forgot to strike the ceremonial close. Delegates exchanged glances and sub-vocalized queries. A few began to edge toward the exits, though no order had been given. Vorlag stood motionless on the dais. His chief military advisor leaned close and whispered that the Vanguard fleet was already in jump space and would reach the human colony of new aspirants within 3 standard cycles. That should have been a comfort, but the advisor's voice wavered. The Emperor's carapace flushed with deep ochre anger. He had delivered ultimatums to 17 other species, crushed 3 rebellions, and watched enemy leaders weep or rage or beg. He had never, in 240 years of rule, been laughed at. A small, analytical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through decades of court intrigue, filed the sound of that laughter away as a datum. It would not be the last time he heard it. Part 2. Jector, sub-senior analyst of the Imperial Security Division, had spent the last 11 cycles in a cramped intelligence node reviewing the ambassador's laughter. The audio file looped in his oral chambers until the rhythm of it embedded itself in his sleep cycles. His superiors wanted answers, and Emperor Vorlag wanted them before the fleet reached New Esperance. Jector's species, the Keth, possessed a neurological architecture that allowed them to process emotional subtext with near-technical precision. He could dissect a voice the way an engineer disassembled an engine, but the human laughter defied categorization. It registered neither hysteria nor simple mockery. It carried a release, a sudden unspooling of tension that suggested the beginning of something, not the end. He cross-referenced human psychological archives, often outdated and fragmentary, and pieced together pattern. Humans laughed when a long building expectation collapsed, when the absurd replaced the predictable, and crucially, when a joke reached its punchline. The implication unsettled him. The war declaration was the setup, not the climax. On the third cycle of analysis, subordinate flagged an anomaly in the transmission metadata of a declaration. Broadcast itself, an encrypted signature layered beneath. The primary signal had piggybacked across every relay node. Jector isolated the signal and ran it through a decryption algorithm that the division had captured from a human probe 10 years earlier. The algorithm purred to life, and the encoded content resolved into a single looping sound, the ambassador's laughter, synchronized and multiplied, running counterpoint to Vorlag's voice. Someone inside the Imperium's own communication network had seeded that laughter into the war declaration before it reached the human envoy. The realization hit Jector like a physical blow. The breach was not external, it was buried deep in the Imperial comms infrastructure. The humans had been listening, and they had already answered before the question was even fully asked. He raced to formulate a priority alert for the Emperor's War Council. The report detailed the embedded laughter, the psychological implications, and the high probability that the human government had anticipated or engineered the declaration. He requested an immediate hold on fleet operations until a full counterinfiltration sweep could be conducted. The response came from Overseer Tormes. Vorlag's chief of staff, the Emperor has reviewed your findings and considers them the product of an ancient mind. The fleet will proceed. Your concerns are noted and archived. Jector's claws scraped grooves into his workstation. He tried again, routing a secondary analysis through the military science division, but the channels closed with the same sterile efficiency. The Imperium had never lost a major engagement. The doctrine of overwhelming force had calcified into dogma. No one wanted to hear that the enemy had already infiltrated the temple. From a stolen code slice, Jector watched the live telemetry as the Vanguard fleet dropped out of jump space on the edge of the New Esperance system. 112 capital ships there, hulls gleaming with the Imperium's Latest phase shielding spread into assault formation. The colony lay exposed, its orbital defenses laughably minimal by Giovanni standards. A single human cruiser waited in high anchor, its silhouette blunt and unimpressive. The fleet admiral, Kale, broadcast the standard demand for unconditional surrender. The cruiser's response was not a transmission of words but a broadcast wave that lit up Jector's monitor with a cascade of errors. Navigation arrays on half the capital. Ships blitzed into recalibration loops. Shield harmonics flickered and inverted. Alarm klaxons wailed inside the fleets. Command channels, and then the first micro-drone swarms erupted from the colony's asteroid belt like a tide of metal insects. Jector heard something else beneath the chaos, human voices, multiple channels, laughing in a steady, rhythmic pulse that overlaid the tactical net. The sound was no longer a single ambassador's reaction, it was a chorus, and it was moving toward the flagship. He sat back and closed his inner eyelids. The punchline was arriving, and the Empire had no idea how long the joke had been running. Part 3. The Giovanni flagship world breaker convulsed as a swarm of thumb-sized drones flooded its starboard hangar bay. They did not explode, they colonized. Each unit latched onto a power coupling, a life support manifold, or a fire suppression pipe, and began to rewrite firmware with predatory speed. Admiral Kale's tactical display splintered into a mosaic of failing subsystems, and the ship's internal comms blared with the sounds of human boarding teams moving through the corridors. The laughter preceded them, it bounced off the bulkheads in distorted echoes, piped through hack ship speakers and the helmet speakers of the boarders themselves. Kale's bridge crew, trained for disciplined void combat, began to fumble their controls. The noise wormed into their concentration, a biological distraction the Empire's military conditioning had never accounted for. On the main view screen, the single human cruiser hung motionless, its hull markings resolved under magnification. RV Mischief, a name that Kale found irritatingly flippant, a direct channel opened from the cruiser, and the image of a human officer in a simple gray duty uniform replaced the tactical feed. She had sharp features and dark, unblinking eyes, and she was still chuckling, the sound now controlled and conversational. Admiral Kale, I'm General Marin Voss. You've brought a lot of firepower to a conversation we've been having for quite a while. I'd like you to listen carefully. Kale's mandibles clicked in defiance. You will be obliterated the moment our reinforcements arrive. Your tricks will not save your colony. Voss shook her head as if correcting a slow student. There are no reinforcements. The fleet you see is the fleet you have. Your jump relays were remapped 9 days ago by a maintenance algorithm your people inherited from a contractor on Dyneth IV. That contractor was a human shell company established 112 standard years before you were born. Your ships are now cut off, and your weapon systems are cycling through a diagnostic loop that will last another 6 hours. The war you just declared has already happened, Admiral. You're standing in the aftermath. A human boarding team breached the bridge. They moved with fluid practiced efficiency, their weapons knocking out Giovanni guards with concussive pulses that dropped them twitching to the deck. The team leader, a young man with a scar across his brow, stepped over a fallen officer and handed General Voss's image. A small device. Voss held it up for Kale to see, a data core taken directly from the world. Breaker's Central Archive. This contains the original founding charter of the Drevani Imperium. The document you revere as your civilization's birthright was drafted by a human artificial intelligence in the year 871 of the old Drevani reckoning. Everything your empire has built, its legal code, its expansion protocols, its succession rituals, was designed by us to create a stable, manageable galactic order. We've been tending this garden for over 2,000 years, Admiral. The Emperor is a figurehead, the real sovereignty has always been human. Kale's carapace blanched to a sickly gray. He tried to summon the words to deny it, but the evidence was unfolding on his own bridge, and the laughter that had haunted him for cycles was now coming from the human standing less than 3 strides away. Voss leaned closer to the pickup. I know this is a lot to process. Take your time. We're not going to kill you. You're far more useful as a witness. The galaxy is about to see what happens when the gardeners step into the light, and honestly, Admiral, we couldn't help but laugh. Do you know how hard it is to keep a secret for 2 millennia? She cut the channel, leaving Kale in a bridge full of humans who were already recalibrating his command console to broadcast a fleet-wide stand-down order. The laughter faded into a low, companionable hum. The war was not being fought, it was being unwound. Part 4. The Empire fractured like dry clay. Within a standard cycle of the new Esperance engagement, 9 subject worlds declared independence, and 3 sector governors were found dead or vanished. The uprisings were too coordinated, too well armed, and their communications bore the unmistakable fingerprints of human logistical planning. Imperial intelligence struggled to find a nerve center to strike and found only mirrors. Jector fled the capital before the security apparatus could brand him a collaborator. His partial warning had gone unheeded, but someone in the upper echelons now wanted him silenced to cover the rot. He traveled on a smuggler's barge to the dead world Kalos, a planet that had been scoured clean by catastrophic war before the Imperium even existed. Old records hinted at a precursor archive buried beneath the ash, and Jector's fragmented research pointed to it as the key to understanding humanity's long shadow play. The archive entrance lay beneath a collapsed temple whose architecture did not match any known Drevani style. He descended through layers of sediment and time, his portable illuminator picking out corridors lined with data storage crystals that predated the Imperium's oldest libraries. In the central vault, he found a single active terminal, its power supply still humming after millennia. The interface adapted to his touch, and the records flooded his neural implants. Humanity had not always been the gardeners, they had been the soil. The archives showed a proto-Drevani empire, brutal and expansionist, that had conquered a small system on the outer arm of a minor spiral. That system was Earth. The humans of that era were a servant caste, bred for labor and art, valued for their dexterity and creativity, but they had learned, they had hidden their intelligence behind subservient masks, and over centuries they infiltrated every stratum of their oppressors' society, not with weapons but with culture. They rewired the Drevani sense of history through myth altered there, genetic lineages through selected pairings and slowly, patiently erased the memory of Earth's subjugation from the collective consciousness. The Dravani forgot they had ever been conquerors. They forgot the very existence of humans who vanished into the periphery of space and waited, then, with the anonymity of ghosts, humans guided the Dravani from the shadows, shaping their religion, their language, their imperial ambitions until the Imperium became a caretaker state for a galaxy too dangerous to leave unmanaged. The joke was simple. The rulers were they ruled, the predators were the keepers, and the servants were the architects. Jector's limbs trembled. He understood. Finally, the source of the laughter. It was the sound of 2,000 years of deferred triumph, a mirth that had been held underwater for ages and now broke the surface. He heard a footstep behind him. An old human woman, her spine straight, despite her years, stood in the doorway. She wore a simple maintenance jumpsuit and carried no weapon. Her name, she said, was Ava Corso. She had been the archivist here for the last 90 years, waiting for someone like Jexter to find the truth. "You're not going to kill me?" he asked. "Not unless you make it necessary," Ava replied. "You're the only Dravani analyst who came close to warning your emperor. That takes more courage than your entire fleet. We value courage. We value truth seekers. The question is, what do you value now?" She offered her hand, palm up, an ancient human gesture of invitation. Jexter stared at it, the archives, impossible history swirling through his mind, and knew that the next choice would define not just his own life, but the memory of his entire species. Part 5. Ava, of course, led Jexter deeper into the archive through chambers that hummed with the breath of ancient machinery. The air smelled of cool stone and ozone-free ion exchange, clean and sterile. She talked as they walked, her voice carrying the rhythm of a teacher who had explained these truths many times before. The Dravani have a saying that the universe is built on cycles of dominance and submission. We agreed with that in a way, but we changed the definitions. We decided that dominance meant responsibility and submission meant patience. We didn't want to destroy your people. We wanted to redirect them. Gardener doesn't hate the soil. She just changes what grows. Jexter absorbed her words. The history he had been taught held no trace of this subterranean narrative, yet the data around him was irrefutable. The Dravani Imperium's core technologies, jump gate architecture, phase shielding, even the genetic templates of the royal lineage, all bore the subtle markers of human engineering, like a signature folded into the grain of a painting. The laughter, he said, it wasn't mockery. Ava smiled, a genuine sorrowful expression. It was relief. The Emperor's declaration was the final trigger we'd waited for. For 2 millennia we've held the strings, without ever stepping onto the stage. The tension of that secrecy, living among you, guiding you, loving some of you, and never being able to say who we really were, that tension had to break. Somewhere, when Vorlag declared war, the absurdity of it was the final key. The punchline arrived. Our generals laughed, because they were finally allowed to laugh. Jector thought of the ambassador, Lydia Kane, wiping a tear from her eye. He had assumed arrogance, but it might have been the release of a woman who had held her breath for decades. "What happens now?" he asked. Ava gestured to a star chart that shimmered into being above a central projector. The map showed the Imperium, dissolving in real time, its territories, reorganizing into a looser federation. Under human stewardship, the Empire was a shell, and shells are meant to crack when the creature inside outgrows them. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy the way the Drevani did. We want to live in it without fear. The only way to do that was to ensure the Empire could never threaten us. So we built it to be incapable of that threat from the start. The war declaration was a mistake we allowed Vorlag to make to give us the legal and moral cover to step forward. No one will mourn a dying empire that attacked first. Jecther's analyst mind saw the beauty of the design. It was ruthless, but it was also merciful. The Drevani had committed countless atrocities across their history, most of them unknowingly shaped by human scripts. The script had now turned to its final page. Ava handed him a small data chip. This contains the protocols to shut down the doomsday weapon your Emperor is about to activate. He thinks it will burn Earth. What it will actually do is broadcast a neuro-pacifying sequence across every Drevani mind. Your species will survive. Jecther, you'll be free of the old imperatives forever, but Vorlag has to be stopped before he realizes the weapon was never his to control. Jecther closed his claws around the chip. He had spent his life serving a lie, but he could now serve the truth. He nodded. I'll get it to the palace. Part 6. The Imperial Palace orbited a gas giant named Vorlag's Eye, a marble of white stone and fusion lamps. Emperor Vorlag had sealed himself in the innermost sanctum, surrounded by the corpses of servants he had slain in paranoid rage. The fleet was shattered. The subject worlds were in open revolt, and the humans had not fired a single planet killer. They had only laughed and told stories. That Vorlag realized was the most terrifying weapon of all. On his throne, he activated the final mandate, a doomsday weapon keyed to the Drevani genetic sequence. The system required a biological confirmation from the reigning emperor and a second command from the Imperial Chancellery, but Vorlag had long since consolidated both under his own authority. He pressed his palm to the scanner and spoke the activation phrase his ancestors had passed down through generations. Nothing happened. The console displayed a single line of text in an archaic script that predated the Imperium itself. Override not recognized, paired human key absent. Vorlag screamed. He summoned engineers, but the palace's systems no longer answered him. The lighting dimmed to a soft amber, and the omnipresent hum of the environmental controls shifted pitch. Then the music began, a gentle lilting melody carried by a single human voice, a lullaby sung centuries before Starflight. The sound poured from every speaker in the palace, every ship still in orbit, every comm buoy in the system. Across the Drevani territories, the lullaby washed over billions. It was not a weapon of destruction, but a key to a lock buried deep in the Drevani psyche. The ancient human engineers had encoded a pacification trigger into the genetic memory of the species, a melody that, when heard, dampened aggression and opened a window of profound calm. The Emperor's doomsday device had been designed to deliver that trigger, not a salvo of warheads. Vorlag's fury bled away against his will. His limbs grew heavy, the scars on his carapace seemed less important. He thought of the gardens he had played in. As a larval prince, the taste of cool water, the hum of his mother's lullabies. Human generals entered the sanctum, led by Marin Voss. They walked without hostility, and their laughter had softened into a warm, respectful quiet. Voss approached the throne and knelt, not in supplication, but to bring her eyes level with the emperor. Your Majesty, the war is over. It was over before it began. You are not a prisoner, and you will not be executed. You've been carrying a burden your ancestors never consented to. Now you can rest. Vorlag's voice was thick. Why preserve us? Why not destroy us centuries ago? Voss reached out and touched his carapace, a gesture of profound familiarity among Drevani. Because we were once your servants, and servants can come to love the household. Even when the master is cruel, we chose to heal you rather than hurt you. It just took a long time. The lullaby continued, and the galaxy turned on its quiet axis, the war already fading into the category of stories told to children. Part 7. The reshaping of galactic governance took 5 standard years. The Drevani Imperium was formally dissolved and replaced by the Stellar Commons, a coalition in which humanity sat as a founding member alongside a dozen other species. Jecther, now the Drevani ambassador to the Commons, worked tirelessly to preserve his people's cultural identity while dismantling the structures that had made them tyrants. He often consulted with Ava Corso, who had become the director of historical reconciliation, and the two developed a deep, unlikely friendship. Lydia Kine, the ambassador who had laughed, retired to a coastal village on Earth's Mediterranean shore. She granted one interview to a galactic news consortium in which she was asked if she ever regretted the deception. She looked out at the sea and gave a small, private smile. We didn't lie, we waited. There's a difference. We let your empire believe it was the center of the universe until it was strong enough to understand that no one is the center. That takes time. And it takes love. We love the Drevani enough to be patient. The galaxy learned to listen to human laughter with new ears. It became a cultural symbol, painted on murals and woven into music. It was the sound of survival, of tension broken, of a joke so long and so carefully crafted that its punchline reshaped civilization. Jecther visited Earth for the first time. 3 years after the transition, he walked the streets of a city called Lisbon, where the air smelled of salt and cooking spices. In a park he saw human children chasing each other, shrieking with laughter as they tumbled on the grass. The sound was not a weapon, it was not a strategy, it was pure, unguarded joy. He sat on a bench and let the laughter wash over him. He thought of Vorlag's roar, the silence of the conclave, and the lullaby that had saved his people from themselves. He understood now that the laughter had never been about victory. It was about the moment when a long-held fear finally loosens its grip, and the future becomes something you can share rather than survive. A human child tripped near his feet and looked up at him with wide, curious eyes, entirely unafraid. Jecther made a small, awkward sound in his vocal slits, the closest the Keth could come to a chuckle. The child laughed back, and the galaxy kept turning, balanced at last.